Off to the stream. So this is day one on what I'm calling a 20-year project. Um, as you can see in the thumbnail, those are the complete books, the great books of the Western world. They go from ancient Greece, the pre-Socratics, all the way to the Freud in the first edition. So we have a copy of these at the high school I teach at, and they haven't been checked out in years. Literally, I think they've been on the shelf for 75 years. Some of the volumes have never been checked out at all. And I went back and forth about going through the book and blacking out the name of the school. And, you know, no one's reading these books. I don't even think you can buy them from Britannica anymore. So I'm just trying to spread the knowledge in these books, Britannica. If you would like to enter into some sort of agreement, I would be totally open to that. But all of these are in the public domain. I really appreciate you guys in 1954 putting them into this beautiful set. But I have scanned them, and I feel there's no one on YouTube has read all these books all the way through. And I thought, what better project? It's a great reason to be on here forever. So every Sunday, I'm going to read through these for an hour until we get through all of them, and I'll be about 60 years old, and that'll be fine. Because I feel that if you want to have anything to do with politics or the world at all, you need to have all this in your head. Otherwise, you're missing out. You're missing out on a lot of the world's best knowledge that's came before. So let's see here. We are going to open, and I've scanned these. I have not cropped them yet. So I'm just going to zoom in one by one. Why didn't it not open them all? Maybe it opened that one separately. Let's see. That should do it. Open preview. And maybe in when I do my GIMP stream on Wednesday, we'll work together on cleaning these up a little bit. So let's see if I can share. Share screen. Okay. And then pick window. And we will do these right here. Okay. So I need to see. Okay, you can still see my face. You don't really need to see that. So I'm just going to take me off, and we're just going to show the book itself. All right. So I think we're going. It's 3 minutes in, so I'm going to do this till an hour and 5 minutes, and then we'll stop. Okay. And oh yeah, I wanted to eventually turn these into more high quality audiobooks. So I'm gonna see if I can do this. I'm really hoping I can open up GarageBand. Oh, I gotta download it. Really? I can't believe I don't have that on here already. So it might take us a little extra time. So I'm gonna see if I can do that now that I have a fast computer. It helps me for kind of motivation to do things in front of other people. And then for those that like to get it in kind of the live format, you can do it this way. And then I can go back later on and clean up the book and, have a much higher quality audio all ready to go. So, what are some of the people in these books? We'll talk about that while I download this. Plato, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, all of Shakespeare, Melville, Freud, Marx, William James. I don't feel William James gets enough love. Probably won't get to him till I'm about 58. But William James is on there. Everybody. there's not much Eastern philosophy. You don't get the Confucius or the Tao Te Ching, but I don't know. I just don't know how people get bored in life. I still need to learn Chinese, and then maybe in China they have the great books of the Eastern world already in an encyclopedia form. And I don't know, if I live till 120, I'll read those too. Um, but we'll get the West down first. Now, I find it really interesting that there's so much overlap between East and West. Like, China is a Marxist Leninist country. Well, Marx and Lenin were of the West, and China is the prevailing power of the East. So it's interesting how the philosophies overlap and synthesize. Hegel's in here too, and become something even new and better than you ever could have thought to begin with. But the first volume of this book's really interesting. They talk about why they put it out, and I just realized I'm just showing you a book. I might as well talk while this program is downloading. Okay, here we go. We're done. Open. Yeah, I'll go ahead and continue. Oh boy, it's downloading more stuff. I don't care. I'm not quitting. This is what I wanted to do. This is the Sunday. Great Books of the Western World Sundays. Had 3 streams I wanted to do tonight. I just got done with my Lavrov one, Michael Rossi's excellent channel. And then this is the one I'll always do on Sunday. And then there's a third one that just popped in with the book club I'm a part of, and I wanted to help that out. If you write a recommended books page, we might add it to the infra wiki. Thanks, man. Like for me personally, for these, it's the great books of the Western world. So it's everything from Aristophanes to Freud. It's all of it. But I always looked up to Haas for his philosophical background, and I'm going to fill myself in 100% all the way. All right, y'all. We still got 4 minutes on this garage band. I can't believe that wasn't already on here. That is nuts. Well, we'll just chill for a minute. And I think I am going to have to pay the $240 for StreamYard Medium or whatever. I've noticed a lot of people don't stream in 1080p. Even big people, they still prefer 720p. I guess it's just steadier, maybe. But that's the main reason to shell out all the money for StreamYard Pro Plus or whatever it is. You get to stream in 1080p. The other one, the midsection one, it's $240 a year, and it takes the little banner off up here, which I need to double check and make sure. I think I did. Yeah, I'm using this mic. Yep. Takes a little banner off, and $240 a year though. It's a lot. It hurts you. Hurts the old teacher pocketbook. Part of me keeps wanting to say, like, I want to start breaking even on this whole streaming thing before I start doing that, but I don't know. There's a lot of upfront investment with this. That's just how I'm looking at it. Come on, GarageBand. 2 minutes left. All right, we're getting close. So I'm probably just going to stream tonight till my battery dies. We're at 83%. After this, I'm going to try to read an hour and a half of Michael Hudson's newest book. That's what we're reading for our CPI book club, and I thought it would be kind and helpful to create a little audiobook, visual audiobook for my brothers and sisters in arms, my comrades. Um, an audiobook of that does not exist. So I don't know. I hope Hudson would be okay with me spreading that far and wide as well. I just now that one I can put buy here, Amazon.com, and kind of feel like I'm helping a brother out. This one, all these are used sets. I don't think they print these anymore. So um I don't think it'd hurt to have a digital version for posterity on the old interwebs. Oh, this thing's lying to me. It still says 2 minutes. It has went pretty fast for still streaming. It's so nice to have a computer that'll just hack it now. I don't really have to worry here. Um 1.7 gigs. We got to get to 2.1. I wonder if I can share that. Share the downloading screen. Maybe I can. There it is. We'll watch it together. Go, little bar. Run, run, run. 1 minute, 1.9. Okay. So we're getting close. 2.10. We got to do 2.16. 2.14.5. There we go. We did it. All software. Well, you better install fast. It's a SSD. Learn by doing. Do on the fly. Live streaming's so weird because it's like I remember the first time I saw it, I just didn't understand it. I saw people doing video game streams for like 9 straight hours. And I'm a huge completionist, so I was like, how are people digesting this content? It took me a long time to realize they're not. They are just stopping by here and there is what's going on. Okay. We're going to begin with the starter set of sounds. Okay. Okay. Come on, buddy. Open up. Scanning audio units. Okay. Optimized for the M1 Max. Well, thank you. 230 instruments. 2,800 loops. Mark Ronson. I love Mark Ronson. Still haven't really figured out how to use loops on GarageBand. Ableton just seems to be the way to go. Okay. So we got this open. We are going to, I'll show you what I'm doing. Let me pull it up here. Share window. There we go. GarageBand. Okay, so I'm going to hit new. Oh, I guess I can already do that. We can just hit recording, We want input 1. My instrument is connected. System settings, input device, volt. There we go. Output, we'll put volt as well. See if that'll fix it. Input 1. Input 1 is volt. All right, and we're getting green, so let's hit record. And I will, oh, we got a metronome on. We don't want that. Turn that off. Go back, hit record. Record. Still got a metronome on. I don't want that. Take it off. Back all the way. Hit record. All right. Are we recording? It sure looks like it. Awesome. So now we just minimize this and quit sharing that. And we're at 16 minutes, so I need to get to 1 hour and 20 minutes. Let's just do that. Share screen. Share window. And my scans here. All right, let's make sure that's showing up. It is. Get me off there. You can see that. See if I can make it all the way big. What does that do? Ah, that works. All right. So here we go. There's the cover of the book. There's book 1. It's been checked out 3 times from our local library. So you start with, we're on number 1 right here. And these are kind of just like collected ideas. So I don't know if I'll read all those, but then we start with Homer and you go all the way through and end with Freud. So you zoom over here. Yep, we're looking good. I'm off the screen and we'll start going. Great Books of the Western World. Book 1, The Great Conversation. Thanks to Mortimer J. Adler for editing this. And thanks to Encyclopedia Britannica for putting it together way back in the day. And thanks to the Salem High School Library for keeping it for almost a century in nice condition. All right. Intro, lots of intros. Here we go. So this is who donated to make the book possible. Quite a few names here. More names. Libraries. Oh, there's the contents. The Tradition of the West. Okay, so we got the preface, the history and purpose of the set, the Great Conversation, the Tradition of the West, Modern Times, Education and Economics, the Disappearance of Liberal Education, Experimental Science, Education for All, the Education of Adults, The Next Great Change, East and West, A Letter to the Reader. And then there's possible approaches to this set. They kind of recommend jumping around and reading different ones. I'm just going to read it all the way through. I'm going to read it from book 1 to the end. Yep. Preface. Until lately, the West has regarded it as self-evident that the road to education lay through great books. No man was educated unless he was acquainted with the masterpieces of his tradition. There never was very much doubt in anybody's mind about which the masterpieces were. They were the books that had endured and that the common voice of mankind called the finest creations in writing of the Western mind. In the course of history, from epoch to epoch, new books have been written that have won their place in the list. Books once thought entitled to belong to it have been superseded, and this process of change will continue as long as men can think and write. It is the task of every generation to reassess the tradition in which it lives, to discard what it cannot use, and to bring into context with the distant and intermediate past the most recent contributions to the great conversation. This set of books is the result of an attempt to reappraise and re embody the tradition of the West for our generation. The editors do not believe that any of the social and political changes that have taken place in the last 50 years, or any that now seem imminent, have invalidated or invalidate the tradition or make it irrelevant for modern men. On the contrary, they are convinced that the West needs to recapture and re-emphasize and bring to bear upon its present problems the wisdom that lies in the works of its greatest thinkers and in the discussion that they have carried on. This set of books is offered in no antiquarian spirit. We have not seen our task as that of taking tourists on a visit to ancient ruins or to the quaint productions of primitive peoples. We have not thought of providing our readers with hours of relaxation or with an escape from the dreadful cares that are the lot of every man in the second half of the 20th century after Christ. We are as concerned as anybody else at the headlong plunge into the abyss that Western civilization seems to be taking. We believe that the voices that may recall the West to sanity are those which have taken part in the great conversation. We want them to be heard again, not because we want to go back to antiquity, or the Middle Ages, or the Renaissance, or the 18th century. We are quite aware that we do not live in any time but the present, and, distressing as the present is, we would not care to live in any other time if we could. We want the voices of the great conversation to be heard again because we think they may help us to learn to live better now. We believe that in the passage of time, the neglect of these books in the 20th century will be regarded as an aberration and not, as it is sometimes called today, a sign of progress. We think that progress, and progress in education in particular, depends on the incorporation of the ideas and images included in this set in the daily lives of all of us, from childhood through old age. In this view, the disappearance of great books from education and from the reading of adults constitutes a calamity. In this view, education in the West has been steadily deteriorating. The rising generation has been deprived of its birthright. The mess of pottage it has received in exchange has not been nutritious. Adults have come to lead lives comparatively rich in material comforts and very poor in moral, intellectual, and spiritual tone. We do not think that these books will solve all our problems. We do not think that they are the only books worth reading. We think that these books shed some light on all our basic problems and that it is folly to do without any light we can get. We think that these books show the origins of many of our most serious difficulties. We think that the spirit they represent and the habit of mind they teach are more necessary today than ever before. We think that the reader who does his best to understand these books will find himself led to read and helped to understand other books. We think that reading and understanding great books will give him a standard by which to judge all other books. We believe that the reduction of the citizen to an object of propaganda, private and public, is one of the greatest dangers to democracy. A prevalent notion is that the great mass of the people cannot understand and cannot form an independent judgment upon any matter. They cannot be educated in the sense of developing their intellectual powers, but they can be bamboozled. The reiteration of slogans, the distortion of the news, the great storm of propaganda that beats upon the citizen 24 hours a day, all his life long, mean either that democracy must fall a prey to the loudest and most persistent propagandists, or that the people must save themselves by strengthening their minds so that they can appraise the issue for themselves. Great books alone will not do the trick, for the people must have the information on which to base a judgment as well as the ability to make one. In order to understand inflation, for example, and to have an intelligent opinion as to what can be done about it, the economic facts in a given country at a given time have to be available. Great books cannot help us there, but they can help us to that grasp of history, politics, morals, and economics, and to that habit of mind which are needed to form a valid judgment on the issue. Great books may even help us to know what information we should demand. If we knew what information to demand, we might have a better chance of getting it. Though we do not recommend great books as a panacea for our ills, we must admit that we have an exceedingly high opinion of them as an educational instrument. We think of them as the best educational instrument for young people and adults today. By this, we do not mean that this particular set is the last word that can be said on the subject. We may have made errors of selection. We hope that this collection may someday be revised in the light of the criticism it will receive. But the idea that liberal education is the education that everybody ought to have, and that the best way to a liberal education in the West is through the greatest books the West has produced, is still, in our view, the best educational idea there is. The elements of novelty in the present day presentation of this idea are accounted for by the changes of the past 50 years. For reasons that will be later described, great books have disappeared, or almost disappeared, from American education. Since we take American education as the prototype of education in any highly developed industrial democracy, we predict their disappearance everywhere in the West. As I have said, we regard this disappearance as an aberration and not as an indication of progress. We do not look upon this disappearance as a benefit to be thankful for, but as an error that should be corrected. The element of novelty that results from the disappearance of the books we take to be novelty only in the most superficial sense. We see this set as continuing a tradition that has been only momentarily interrupted. A second element of novelty in the presentation of these books at this time is found in the proposition that democracy requires liberal education for all. We believe that this proposition is true. We concede that it has not been scientifically proved. We call upon our fellow citizens to test it. We think they will agree that, if this is the ideal, we should struggle to reach it and not content ourselves with inferior substitutes until we are satisfied that the goal cannot be attained. The third element of novelty in the effort to restore these books to education is found in the conception of adult education that we wish to advance. Until very recently, the education of adults the world over was regarded as compensatory. Opportunity for adult study was offered those whose economic, social, or political position had deprived them, in ways often regarded as unjust, of the amount of formal education usual among the superior classes. I am referring here, of course, only to general non-vocational education. Many other kinds of educational activities for adults have traveled under other banners. Labor unions have wanted to train their members in industrial bargaining. Individuals have wanted to prepare themselves for better jobs. When a man had made up for the deficiencies of his formal schooling, his obligation, and usually his desire, to educate himself naturally disappeared. He had reached the goal he had set for himself. I think it fair to say that in most countries of the world today, the notion that a man who had in childhood and youth the best institutional education the country had to offer, should go on educating himself all his life, would be regarded as fantastic. Yet we believe that the obligation rests on all of us, uneducated, miseducated, and educated alike, to do just that. We do not depreciate the possibilities of these books as a means of educating young people. We think the sooner the young are introduced to the great conversation, the better. They will not be able to understand it very well, but they should be introduced to it in the hope that they will continue to take part in it and eventually understand it. But we confess that we have had principally in mind the needs of the adult population, who, in America at least, have as a result of the changes of the last 50 years the leisure to become educated men and women. They now have the chance to understand themselves through understanding their tradition. Our principal aim in putting these books together was to offer them the means of doing so. The members of the advisory board, in addition to long experience as teachers of young people, had all devoted a large part of their lives to the education of adults. They had all sought to use great books for the purpose of educating adults. They determined to try to offer the means of liberal education in a coherent program. This set of books was the result. The board asked itself whether an individual book contributed in an important way to the great conversation. The members drew upon their experience in teaching as a guide. They do not claim that all the great books of the West are here. They would not be embarrassed at the suggestion that they had omitted a book or several books, greater than any they had included. They would be disturbed if they thought they had omitted books essential to a liberal education or had included any that had little bearing upon it. The discussions of the board revealed few differences of opinion about the overwhelming majority of the books in the list. The set is almost self-selected, in the sense that one book leads to another, amplifying, modifying, or contradicting it. There is not much doubt about which are the most important voices in the great conversation. Of marginal cases, there are a few. Many readers will be disappointed to find one, at least, of their favorite works missing. Many readers will be surprised to find some author of whom they had a low opinion given a place of honor. The final decision on the list was made by me. I do not pretend that my prejudices played no part. I would like to claim that I sought, obtained, and usually accepted excellent advice. Readers who are startled to find the Bible omitted from the set will be reassured to learn that this was done only because Bibles are already widely distributed, and it was felt unnecessary to bring another, by way of this set, into homes that had several already. References to the Bible are, however, included in both the King James and the Douai versions under the appropriate topics in the Synopticon. The editors felt that the chronological order was the most appropriate organizing principle for the volumes of this set. Since they conceived of this collection of books as reproducing a conversation among its authors, it was a natural decision to make these successive volumes of the set present, so far as possible, the authors in the temporal sequence in which they took part in that conversation. Examining the chronological structure of the set, the reader will also note that the great conversation covers more than 25 centuries, but he may wonder at its apparent termination with the end of the 19th century. With the exception of some of Freud's writings, all the other works here assembled were written or published before 1900, and some of Freud's important works were published before that date. The editors do not think that the great conversation came to an end before the 20th century began. On the contrary, they know that the great conversation has been going on during the first half of this century. And they hope it will continue to go on during the rest of this century and the centuries to follow. They are confident that great books have been written since 1900 and that the 20th century will contribute many new voices to the great conversation. The reason then for the omission of authors and works after 1900 is simply that the editors did not feel that they or anyone else could accurately judge the merits of contemporary writings. During the editorial deliberations about the contents of the set, more difficult problems were encountered in the case of 19th century authors and titles than with regard to those of any preceding century. The cause of these difficulties, the proximity of these authors and works to our own day, and our consequent lack of perspective with regard to them, would make it far more difficult to make a selection of 20th century authors. If the reader is interested in knowing some of the possible candidates for inclusion from the 20th century, he will find their names in the bibliography of additional readings, which is appended to the Synopticon in Volume 3, pages 1143 to 1217. The additional readings that come at the end of each of the Synopticon's 102 chapters on the great ideas try to make an adequate representation of works written in this century, and in doing so, they name books that may prove themselves great, as other great books have done, by submission with the passage of time to the general judgment of mankind. The editors did not seek to assemble a set of books representative of various periods or countries. Antiquity and the Middle Ages, the Renaissance and modern times are included in proportion as the great writers of these epochs contributed to the deepening, extension, or enrichment of the tradition of the West. It is worth noting that, though the period from 1500 to 1900 represents less than 1/6 of the total extent of the literary record of the Western tradition, the last 400 years is represented in this set by more than one half the volumes of great books of the Western world. The editors did not, in short, allot a certain space to a certain epoch in terms of the amount of time in human history that it consumed, nor did we arbitrarily allot a certain space to a certain country. We tried to find the most important voices in the conversation, without regard to the language they spoke. We did encounter some difficulties with language that we thought insurmountable, where the excellence of a book depended principally on the excellence of its language, and where no adequate translation could be found or made, we were constrained reluctantly to omit it. We thought it no part of our duty to emphasize national contributions, even those of our own country. I omitted Emerson, Whitman, Thoreau, and Mark Twain, all very great writers, because I felt that, important as they were, they did not measure up to the other books in the set. They carried forward the great conversation, but not in such a way as to be indispensable to the comprehension of it. Obviously, in a set made up of a limited number of volumes, only the writers that seemed indispensable could be included. Some writers have made an important contribution to the great conversation, but in a way that makes it impossible to include it in a set like this. These are writers of whom Leibniz, Voltaire, and Balzac are notable examples, whose contribution lies in the total volume of their work rather than in a few great works, and whose total volume is too large to be included, or whose single works do not come up to the standard of the other books in this set. What we wanted, first of all, of course, was to make these books available. In many cases, all or some of an author's works included in this set were unavailable. They were either inaccessible or prohibitively expensive. This is true of works by Aristotle, Galen, Euclid, Archimedes, Apollonius, Nicomachus, Ptolemy, Copernicus, Kepler, Plotinus, Aquinas, Gilbert, Harvey, Descartes, Pascal, Newton, Kant, Lavoisier, Fourier, Faraday, and Freud. We attach importance to making whole works, as distinguished from excerpts, available, and in all but 3 cases, Aquinas, Kepler, and Fourier, the 443 works of the 74 authors in this set are printed complete. One of the policies upon which the advisory board insisted most strongly was that the great writers should be allowed to speak for themselves. They should speak with their full voice and not be digested or mutilated by editorial decisions. Undoubtedly, this policy makes reading more difficult, for the reader becomes to this extent his own editor. No one will deny that many arid stretches are contained in the works of the great writers, but we believed that it would be presumptuous for us to do the reader's skipping for him. When Hermann Hesse referred to the present as the age of the digest, he did not intend to say anything complimentary. Since the set was conceived of as a great conversation, it is obvious that the books could not have been chosen with any dogma or even with any point of view in mind. In a conversation that has gone on for 25 centuries, all dogma and points of view appear. Here are the great errors as well as the great truths. The reader has to determine which are the errors and which are the truths. The task of interpretation and conclusion is his. This is the machinery and life of the Western tradition in the hands of free men. The title of this set is Great Books of the Western World. I shall have more to say later about great books of the Eastern world, and merely wish to remark here that in omitting them from this collection, we do not intend to depreciate them. The conversation presented in this set is peculiar to the West. We believe that everybody, Westerners and Easterners, should understand it, not because it is better than anything the East can show, but because it is important to understand the West. We hope that editors who understand the tradition of the East will do for that part of the world what we have attempted to do for our own tradition in great books of the Western world and the Synopticon. With that task accomplished for both the West and the East, it should be possible to put together the common elements in the traditions and to present great books of the world. Few things could do as much to advance the unity of mankind. Some readers may feel that we have been too hard on them in insisting that the great works of science are a part of the conversation, and that a man who has not read them has not acquired a liberal education. Others, who concede the importance of science to understanding the world today, may raise the question of whether it is possible to understand modern science and its contribution to the modern world through the medium of books of the past. They may feel that, whereas philosophy, history, and literature can produce works that are always fresh and new, natural science is progressive and is rapidly outdated. Why read Copernicus or Faraday if scientists now know everything that they knew and much more besides? It is interesting to note that some years after the books had been selected for this set, President James B. Conant of Harvard, a distinguished chemist, proposed to make the kind of books selected central in a reform of scientific education for the layman. He said, "What I propose is the establishment of one or more courses at the college level on the tactics and strategy of science. The objective would be to give a greater degree of understanding of science by the close study of the relatively few historical examples of the development of science. I suggest courses at the college level, for I do not believe they could be understood earlier in a student's education. But there is no reason why they could not become important parts of programs of adult education. Indeed, such courses might well prove particularly suitable for older groups of men and women. The greatest hindrance to the widespread use of case histories in teaching science is the lack of suitable case material. I am hopeful that, if a sufficient number of teachers become interested in the approach suggested in the following pages, a cooperative enterprise might be launched, which would go far to overcome the difficulties now presented by the paucity of printed material available for student use. Together, they might plan for the translation, editing, and publishing in suitable form of extracts from the history of science, which would be of importance to the college teacher. It is no small undertaking, but one of the first importance. When it is remembered that two of the most significant works in the history of science, the De Revolutionibus of Copernicus and the De Fabrica of Vesalius, have never been published in English translation, to say nothing of the vast amount of untranslated writings of Kepler, Galileo, Lavoisier, Galvani, and a host of others, it is evident how much remains to be accomplished. The De Revolutionibus of Copernicus and writings of Kepler, Galileo, and Lavoisier appear in this set. So also do the mathematical and scientific works of 19 others: Aristotle, Hippocrates, Galen, Euclid, Archimedes, Apollonius, Nicomachus, Ptolemy, Gilbert, Harvey, Descartes, Pascal, Newton, Huygens, Fourier, Faraday, Darwin, James, and Freud. It is true that scientific works are often omitted from lists of important books on the assumption that such works lack the educational significance of the great poems, the great histories, and the great philosophies, and are somehow not part of our culture, or that they cannot be read except by a few specialists, or that science, unlike poetry, has somehow advanced in modern times in such fashion as to rob the great steps in that advance of any but antiquarian value. But the editors do not agree that the great poets of every time are to be walked with and talked with, but not those who brought deep insight into the mystery of number and magnitude, or the natural phenomena they observed about them. We do not agree that better means of observation or more precise instruments of measurement invalidate the thinking of great scientists of the past, even where such means cause us to correct the hypotheses of these scientists. We lament the man who, properly desiring to wrestle at first hand with the problems that the great poets and philosophers have raised, yet contents himself with the results and findings of modern science. We believe that it is a gratuitous assumption that anybody can read poetry, but very few can read mathematics. In view of the countless engineers and technicians in our society, we should expect many of our readers to find the mathematical and scientific masterpieces more understandable than many other works. As Stringfellow Barr has said, the world is rapidly dividing into technicians who cannot tell the difference between a good poem and a sentimental doggerel, and cultured people who know nothing about electricity except that you push a button when you want it. In a society that is highly technological, the sooner the citizens understand the basic ideas of mathematics and natural science, the better. Poor books in science deal with specialities that serve the technician and pride themselves on juggling jargon. But the best books that get their power from the refinement and precise use of the common language. As far as the medium of communication is concerned, they are products of the most elegant literary style, saying precisely what is meant. Like literary books, they have beginnings, middles, and ends that move from familiar situations through complications to unravelings and recognitions. They sometimes end in the revelation of familiar mysteries. The atmosphere we breathe today, because of the universal use of gadgets and machines, because the word scientific is employed in a magical sense, and because of the half-hidden technological fabric of our lives, is full of the images and myths of science. The minds of men are full of shadows and reflections of things that they cannot grasp. As Scott Buchanan has said, popular science has made every man his own quack. He needs some of the doctor's medicine. Much of this is the result of the mystery that modern man has made of mathematics. It is supposed that the scientist or engineer can understand great scientific works because he understands mathematics, which nobody but a scientist or an engineer can understand. This is the reason why a fairly continuous series of great books in mathematics is contained in this set. The editors believe that mathematical truth will set us free from the superstitions all that surrounds the scientific enterprise today. The reader will be able to decide for himself whether the mathematical and scientific works should have been excluded from the set on the score of their difficulty for the ordinary reader by comparing the difficulty for such a reader of Dante's Divine Comedy and the most difficult of all scientific works, Newton's Principia. There is a cult of scholarship surrounding Dante's masterpiece that is almost as formidable as the cult of mathematics. Most of this work is in philology, metaphysics, and history. The ordinary reader who has heard of this apparatus but never used it is surprised to find that he understands Dante without it. Both the cult of learning around Dante and the cult of ignorance around Newton are phenomena of the vicious specialization of scholarship. Much of the background of Dante is in Euclid and in Ptolemy's astronomy. The structure of both the poem and the world it describes is mathematical. Almost all of Newton, by his express intention, is Euclidean in its arithmetic as well as its geometry. Dante no more delivers his whole message without benefit of some mathematics than does Newton. Both are enhanced by the presence of the scientific voice in the conversation of which they are parts. The advisory board recommended that no scholarly apparatus should be included in the set. No introductions giving the editor's views of the author should appear. The books should speak for themselves, and the reader should decide for himself. Great books contain their own aids to reading. There is one reason why they are great. That is one reason why they are great. Since we hold that these works are intelligible to the ordinary man, we see no reason to interpose ourselves or anybody else between the author and the reader. The Syntopicon, which began as an index and then turned into a means of helping the reader find paths through the books, has ended, in addition to making these contributions as a tool for reference, research, and study, as a preliminary summation of the issues around which the great conversation has revolved, together with indications of the course of the debate at this moment. Once again, the Syntopicon argues no case and presents no point of view. It will not interrupt any book to the reader. It will not tell him which author is right and which wrong on any question. It simply supplies him with suggestions as to how he may conveniently pursue the study of any important topic through the range of Western intellectual history. It shows him how to find what great. I'm not going to read any of the footnotes. So if you want to see those, you just got to look at the book, which is on the screen. Men have had to say about the greatest issues and what is being said about these issues today. But I would do less than justice to Mr. Adler's achievement if I left the matter there. The Syntopicon is, in addition to all this, and in addition to being a monument to the industry, devotion, and intelligence of Mr. Adler and his staff, a step forward in the thought of the West. It indicates where we are, where the agreements and disagreements lie, where the problems are, where the work has to be done. It thus helps to keep us from wasting our time through misunderstanding and points to the issues that must be attacked. When the history of the intellectual life of this century is written, the Syntopicon will be regarded as one of the landmarks in it. The editors must record their gratitude to the advisory board and to their editorial consultants in the British Empire. The advisory board consisted of Stringfellow Barr, professor of history in the University of Virginia, and formerly president of St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, Scott Buchanan, philosopher and formerly dean of St. John's College, John Erskine, novelist and formerly professor of English in Columbia University, Clarence Faust, president of the Fund for the Advancement of Education and formerly dean of the Humanities and Sciences in Leland Stanford University, Alexander Meiklejohn, philosopher and formerly chairman of the School for Social Studies in San Francisco. Joseph Schwab, scientist and professor in the College of the University of Chicago. And Mark Van Doren, poet and professor of English in Columbia University. The editorial consultants were A.F.B. Clark, professor of French literature in the University of British Columbia, Canada. F.L. Lucas, fellow and lecturer of King's College, Cambridge, England, and Walter Murdoch, professor of English literature in the University of Western Australia. The editors would also express their gratitude to Rudolf Ruzicka, designer and typographer, who planned the format of this set of books and designed the typography of its individual works in the light of his reading of them. The editors wish especially to mention their debt to the late John Erskine, who over 30 years ago began the movement to reintroduce the study of great books into American education, and who labored long and arduously on the preparation of this set. Their other special obligation is to Senator William Benton, who is a member of a discussion group in Great Books, proposed the publication of this collection, and who, as publisher and chairman of the board of Encyclopedia Britannica, has followed and fostered it and finally brought it out. Robert M. Hutchins, December 1st, 1951. The Great Conversation. Chapter 1. The Tradition of the West. The tradition of the West is embodied in the Great Conversation that began in the dawn of history and that continues to the present day. Whatever the merits of other civilizations in other respects, no civilization is like that of the West in this respect. No other civilization can claim that its defining characteristic is a dialogue of this sort. No dialogue in any other civilization can compare with that of the West in the number of great works of the mind that have contributed to this dialogue. The goal toward which Western society moves is the civilization of the dialogue. The spirit of Western civilization is the spirit of inquiry. Its dominant element is the logos. Nothing is to remain undiscussed. Everybody is to speak his mind. No proposition is to be left unexamined. The exchange of ideas is held to be the path to the realization of the potentialities of the race. At a time when the West is most often represented by its friends as the source of that technology for which the whole world yearns, and by its enemies as the fountainhead of selfishness and greed, it is worth remarking that, though both elements can be found in the Great Conversation, the Western ideal is not one or the other strand in the conversation, but the conversation itself. It would be an exaggeration to say that Western civilization means these books. The exaggeration would lie in the omission of the plastic arts and music, which have quite as important a part in Western civilization as the great productions included in this set. But to the extent to which books can present the idea of a civilization, the idea of Western civilization is here presented. These books are the means of understanding our society and ourselves. They contain the great ideas that dominate us without our knowing it. There is no comparable repository of our tradition. To put an end to the spirit of inquiry that has characterized the West, it is not necessary to burn the books. All we have to do is to leave them unread for a few generations. On the other hand, the revival of interest in these books from time to time throughout history has provided the West with new drive and creativeness. Great books have salvaged, preserved, and transmitted the tradition on many occasions similar to our own. The books contain not merely the tradition, but also the great exponents of the tradition. Their writings are models of the fine and liberal arts. They hold before us what Whitehead called the habitual vision of greatness. These books have endured because men in every era have been lifted beyond themselves by the inspiration of their example. Sir Richard Livingstone said, "We are tied down all our days, and for the greater part of our days, to the commonplace." That is where contact with great thinkers, great literature helps. In their company, we are still in the ordinary world, but it is the ordinary world transfigured and seen through the eyes of wisdom and genius, and some of their vision becomes our own. Until very recently, these books have been central in education in the West. They were the principal instrument of liberal education, the education that men acquired as an end in itself for no other purpose than that it would help them to be men, to lead human lives and better lives than they would otherwise be able to lead. The aim of liberal education is human excellence, both private and public, for man is a political animal. Its object is the excellence of man and man as citizen. It regards man as an end, not as a means, and it regards the ends of life and not the means to it. For this reason, it is the education of free men. Other types of education or training treat men as means to some other end, or are, at best, concerned with the means of life, with earning a living, and not with its ends. The substance of liberal education appears to consist in the recognition of basic problems, in knowledge of distinctions and interrelations in subject matter, and in the comprehension of ideas. Liberal education seeks to clarify the basic problems and to understand the way in which one problem bears upon another. It strives for a grasp of the methods by which solutions can be reached and the formulation of standards for testing solutions proposed. The liberally educated man understands, for example, the relation between the problem of the immorality of the soul and the problem of the best form of government. He understands that the one problem cannot be solved by the same method as the other, and that the test that he will have to bring to bear upon solutions proposed differs from one problem to the other. The liberally educated man understands, by understanding the distinctions and interrelations of the basic fields of subject matter, the differences and connections between poetry and history, science and philosophy, theoretical and practical science. He understands that the same methods cannot be applied in all these fields. He knows the methods appropriate to each. The liberally educated man comprehends the ideas that are relevant to the basic problems and that operate in the basic fields of subject matter. He knows what is meant by soul, state, God, beauty, and by the other terms that are basic to the discussion of fundamental issues. He has some notion of the insights that these ideas, singly or in combination, provide concerning human experience. The liberally educated man has a mind that can operate well in all fields. He may be a specialist in one field, but he can understand anything important that is said in any field and can see and use the light that it sheds upon his own. The liberally educated man is at home in the world of ideas and in the world of practical affairs too, because he understands the relation of the two. He may not be at home in the world of practical affairs in the sense of liking the life he finds about him, but he will be at home in that world in the sense that he understands it. He may even derive from his liberal education some conception of the difference between a bad world and a good one, and some notion of the ways in which one might be turned into the other. The method of liberal education is the liberal arts, and the result of liberal education is discipline in those arts. The liberal artist learns to read, write, speak, listen, understand, and think. He learns to reckon, measure, and manipulate matter, quantity, and motion in order to predict, produce, and exchange. As we live in the tradition, whether we know it or not, so we are all liberal artists, whether we know it or not. We all practice the liberal arts, well or badly, all the time, every day. As we should understand the tradition as well as we can in order to understand ourselves, so we should be as good liberal artists as we can in order to become as fully human as we can. The liberal arts are not merely indispensable, they are unavoidable. Nobody can decide for himself whether he's going to be a human being. The only question open to him is whether he will be an ignorant, undeveloped one, or one who has sought to reach the highest point he is capable of attaining. The question, in short, is whether he will be a poor liberal artist or a good one. The tradition of the West in education is the tradition of the liberal arts. Until very recently, nobody took seriously the suggestion that there could be any other ideal. The educational ideas of John Locke, for example, which were directed to the preparation of the pupil to fit conveniently into the social and economic environment in which he found himself, made no impression on Locke's contemporaries. And so it will be found that other voices raised in criticism of liberal education fell upon deaf ears until about a half a century ago. This Western devotion to the liberal arts and liberal education must have been largely responsible for the emergence of democracy as an ideal. The democratic ideal is equal opportunity for all human development, and since the liberal arts are the basic means of such development, devotion to democracy naturally results from devotion to them. On the other hand, if acquisition of the liberal arts is an intrinsic part of human dignity, then the democratic ideal demands that we should strive to see to it that all have the opportunity to attain to the fullest measure of the liberal arts that is possible to each. The present crisis in the world has been precipitated by the vision of the range of practical and productive art offered by the West. All over the world, men are on the move, expressing their determination to share in the technology in which the West has excelled. This movement is one of the most spectacular in history, and everybody has agreed upon one thing about it: we do not know how to deal with it. It would be tragic if, in our preoccupation with the crisis, we failed to hold up as a thing of value for the world, even as that which might show us a way in which to deal with the crisis, our vision of the best that the West has to offer. That vision is the range of the liberal arts and liberal education. Our determination about the distribution of the fullest measure of these arts and this education will measure our loyalty to the best in our own past and our total service to the future of the world. The great books were written by the greatest liberal artists. They exhibit the range of the liberal arts. The authors were also the greatest teachers. They taught one another. They taught all previous generations up to a few years ago. The question is whether they can teach us. To this question, we now turn. Chapter 2: Modern Times. Until recently, great books were central in liberal education, but liberal education was limited to an elite. So great books were limited to an elite and to those few of the submerged classes who succeeded in breaking into them in spite of the barriers that society threw up around them. Were anybody bothered to defend this exclusion, it was done on the basis that only those with exceptional intelligence and leisure could understand these books, and that only those who had political power needed to understand them. As the masses were admitted to political activity, it was assumed that, though they must be educated, they could not be educated in this way. They had to learn to read the newspaper and to write a business letter and to make change. But how could they be expected to study Plato or Dante or Newton? All that they needed to know about how great writers could be translated for them in textbooks that did not suffer from the embarrassment of being either difficult or great. The people now have political power and leisure. If they have not always used them wisely, it may be because they have not had the kind of education that would enable them to do so. It is not argued that education through great books and the liberal arts was a poor education for the elite. It is argued that times have changed and that such an education would be a poor education for anybody today, since it is outmoded. It is remote from real life and today's problems. Many of the books were written when men held slaves. Many were written in a pre-scientific and pre-industrial age. What can they have to say to us free, democratic citizens of a scientific industrial era. This is a kind of sociological determinism, as economic determinism holds that all activity is guided and regulated by the conditions of production. So, sociological determinism claims that intellectual activity, at least, is always relative to a particular society, so that if the society changes in an important way, the activity becomes irrelevant. Ideas originating in one state of society can have no bearing on another state of society. If they seem to have a bearing, this is only seeming. Ideas are the rationalizations of the social conditions that exist at any given time. If we seek to use in our own time the ideas of another, we shall deceive ourselves, because by definition, these ideas have no application to any other time than that which produced them. History and common sense explode sociological determinism and economic determinism too. There is something called man on this earth. He wrestles with his problems and tries to solve them. These problems change from epoch to epoch in certain respects. They remain the same in others. What is the good life? What is a good state? Is there a God? What is the nature and destiny of man? Such questions and a host of others persist because man persists, and they will persist as long as he does. Through the ages, great men have written down their discussion of these persistent questions. Are we to disdain the light they offer us on the ground that they lived in primitive, far-off times? As someone has remarked, the Greeks could not broadcast the Aeschylean tragedy, but they could write it. This set of books explodes sociological determinism because it shows that no age speaks with a single voice. No society so determines intellectual activity that there can be no major intellectual disagreements in it. The conservative and the radical, the practical man and the theoretician, the idealist and the realist will be found in every society, many of them conducting the same kind of arguments that are carried on today. Although man has progressed in many spectacular respects, I suppose it will not be denied that he is today worse off in many respects, some of them more important than the respects in which he has improved. We should not reject the help of the sages of former times. We need all the help we can get. The chief exponent of the view that times have changed and that our conception of the best education must change with them is that most misunderstood of all philosophers of education, John Dewey. It is one of the ironies of fate that his followers, who have misunderstood him, have carried all before them in American education, whereas the plans he proposed have never been tried. The notion that it is perhaps most popular in the United States that the object of education is to adjust the young to their environment, and in particular to teach them to make a living, John Dewey roundly condemned, yet it is usually advanced in his name. Dewey was first of all a social reformer. He could not advocate adjustment to an environment, the brutality and injustice. He could not advocate adjustment to an environment, the brutality and injustice. Well, didn't even know I could do that. There we go. Maybe one more page. Of which repelled him. He believed in his own conception of liberal education for all, and looked upon any kind of training directed to learning a trade solely to make a living at it as narrowing and illiberal. He would especially repudiate those who seek to differentiate among the young on the basis of their capacity in order to say that only some are capable of acquiring a liberal education, in Dewey's conception of it or any other. Dewey's central position is stated in his major book on education, Democracy in Education, published in 1916. He says, both practically and philosophically, the key to the present educational situation lies in a gradual reconstruction of school materials and methods so as to utilize various forms of occupation typifying social callings and to bring out their intellectual and moral content. The occupations that are to be engaged in are those which are indicated by the needs and interests of the pupil at the time. Only in this way can there be can there be on the part of the educator and of the one educated a genuine discovery of personal aptitudes so that the proper choice of a specialized pursuit in later life may be indicated. Moreover, the discovery of capacity and aptitude will be a constant progress as long as growth continues. Dewey's chief reason for this recommendation is found in his Psychology of Learning. An occupation is a continuous activity having a purpose. Education through occupations consequently combines within itself more of the factors conducive to learning than any other method. It calls instincts and habits into play. It is a foe to passive receptivity. It has an end in view. Results are to be accomplished. Hence, it appeals to thought. It demands that an idea of an end be steadily maintained, so that activity must be progressive, leading from one stage to another. Observation and ingenuity are required at each stage to overcome obstacles and to discover and readjust means of execution. In short, an occupation pursued under conditions where the realization of the activity, rather than merely the external product is the aim, fulfills the requirements which were laid down earlier in connection with the discussion of aims, interest, and thinking. The doctrine is that occupations, means of earning a living, should constitute the object of the attention of the educational system. This is not for the purpose of teaching the pupils how to make a living. Dewey opposes pure vocational training and urges that a truly liberal and liberating education would refuse today to isolate vocational training on any of its levels from a continuous education in the social, moral, and scientific contexts within which wisely administered callings and professions must function. He proposes education through occupations as a means of arousing interest, which it is assumed can be aroused by the study of occupations, of helping students to select the vocation, and of showing them the significance of the various ways of earning a living. This is not the place for an elaborate critique of this doctrine. It is perhaps enough to say that the misinterpretations and misapplications of it were natural and inevitable. A program of social reform cannot be achieved through the educational system unless it is one that the society is prepared to accept. The educational system is the society's attempt to perpetuate itself and its own ideals. If a society wishes to improve, it will use the educational system for that purpose. Even in this case, it will not allow the educational system to determine for itself what improvement is, unless it is a society that believes that the free and independent exercise of individual judgment is the best way to achieve improvement. If a society does not wish to change, it cannot be reformed through the educational system. In practice, a program of social reform will turn out to be what Dewey's has turned out to be in the hands of his followers, a program of social adjustment. Last page. So a program of education through occupations will in practice turn out to be a program of education for occupations. Indeed, Dewey never tells us how it can be anything else. He does not say how he would accomplish the study of the moral, social, scientific, and intellectual contexts of occupations without resorting to those great books and those liberal arts which he regards as outmoded by experimental science and industrialization. Nor does he indicate any awareness of the practical difficulties of having occupations studied at school. The school cannot duplicate the actual conditions of industry, commerce, finance, and the learned professions. Machines, methods, teachers can never be up to date. The conditions in the educational system generally can never be those that obtain in modern medical school, in which the atmosphere of reality does not have to be created because it is already there. The patient is really sick. The professor is trying to cure him, and the student learns to be a doctor by acting as the professor's assistant. Dewey is certainly correct in saying that the actual conditions of practice teach by arousing interest and defining the aim, but he fails to notice that this leads not to the study of occupations in the educational system, but to the study of occupations through apprenticeship. This is the situation in the medical school. The apprentice is committed to the occupation and learns it under the actual conditions of practice. In the educational system, generally, the actual conditions of practice cannot be successfully imitated, and the pupil is not committed to the occupation. Since the pupil is not committed to the occupation, the proposition that the occupations that are to be studied are those which are indicated by the needs and interests of the pupil at the time is alarming. Between the ages of 6 and 14, I wanted, in rapid succession, to be an iceman, a now extinct occupation, a motorman on the horse cars, also extinct, a fireman, a postman, a policeman, a professional baseball player, and a missionary. The notion that what my teachers should have done was to offer me a study of these occupations as the fancy for each of them took me is so startling that Mr. Dewey's followers may perhaps be excused for refusing to take him literally and contenting themselves with trade school instruction looking toward earning a living. The educational results of studies of occupations, as the passing whims of children suggested them, would hardly be what Mr. Dewey hoped, even if such a curriculum could in fact be instituted, as it never has been. One educational proposition I take to be axiomatic, that matters, that demand experience of those who seek to understand them, cannot be understood by those who are without experience. A child can and should learn about the economic and political system by way of introduction to it, but he cannot understand it in the same way or to the same degree that he can understand arithmetic, music, and science. Nor can he understand the moral and social contents of occupations in which he is never engaged under the actual conditions of practice. As the quotations I have given show, Mr. Dewey wants to concentrate on the study of occupations because he thinks that they will arouse real interest and lead to real learning. But the interest of the young in occupations is neither intense nor permanent, except in the case of an individual with a very special, overwhelming bent, until the time is almost at hand at which they have to make up their minds about the choice of their careers. Even then, they can learn little about them until they have engaged in them, as the apprentice does, under the conditions under which they are carried on in the world. They cannot understand them. Least of all can they understand their social and economic and political contexts until they have had some experience as wage earners and citizens. I say again that imitation experiences in the classroom are not a substitute for actual experiences in life. Such experiences can lead only to illusion. They lead the pupil to think he understands something when he does not. All right. So we are stopping at the top of 14. Let me find this here. Stop. We will save as. The Western world. One. Conversation. And save. All right. And let's pull back up this and switch back to me. And there is miraculously 3 people watching that. That's amazing. So, as I always do at the end, I will recommend if you like this content, you can give me a few bucks or become a member at Buy Me a Coffee. I like it best because of the color scheme, honestly. I'm a big fan of orange. And we'll be back next week, and we'll probably read another 20 pages on Saturday until I'm 60 years old, and we'll have read all the way from Homer to Sigmund Freud, and everybody in between. So I love y'all. If you like that content, stick around. I'm about to dip into Michael Hudson and make a little audiobook for my bros. All right. Peace out, everybody. Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate it, Timoshenko. We'll keep it up. Encyclopedia Britannica, if you love that, call me. Give me money. I'm ready. Bye, everybody. God bless.